sun beat down mercilessly on Marcus Hayes's weathered face as he surveyed his struggling cornfield. The stalks brown and brittle, despite his best efforts with what little irrigation he could afford. The thermometer nailed to the old oak tree by his farmhouse read 98 degrees, and it wasn't even noon yet. Sweat soaked through his faded denim shirt as he walked the rows, mentally calculating how much of this season's crop he'd lose to the relentless drought that had plagued central Iowa for the third consecutive summer. His boots crunched against the parched earth, each step stirring up small clouds of dust that seemed to mock his efforts. The mortgage payment loomed large in his mind, due in just 2 weeks, and the bank had already sent one notice about his delayed payments from last quarter. At 43, Marcus had spent nearly 2 decades working this 160-acre plot that had been in his family for 3 generations, but each year seemed harder than the last. The small farming operation that had once sustained his grandparents and parents now barely kept him afloat, even with his weekend job at the hardware store in town. He paused near the fence line, pulling off his worn baseball cap to wipe the perspiration from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. The silence of the countryside felt oppressive today, broken only by the occasional buzz of insects and the distant hum of air conditioning units working overtime in the scattered houses visible across the rolling hills. Marcus remembered when these fields had been green and lush, when the corn grew tall enough to hide a full-grown man, when the harvest brought enough income to make improvements to the land and the house where he'd grown up. The sound of a car engine cutting through the stillness made him look toward the gravel road that bordered his property. A sleek silver sedan, clearly out of place in this rural setting, had pulled over onto the shoulder near his mailbox. Steam was rising from under the hood, and as Marcus watched, the driver's door opened. A woman stepped out, her professional attire wilting in the oppressive heat. Even from a distance, he could see her frustration as she pulled out her phone, presumably to call for help. Marcus hesitated for a moment, remembering his grandfather's lessons about neighborly kindness, then started walking toward the road. The woman looked to be in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in what had probably started the day as a neat ponytail, but now hung limply against her neck. Her navy blue blazer was draped over her arm, revealing a crisp white blouse that showed obvious signs of the battle against the unforgiving temperature. "Car trouble?" Marcus called out as he approached, noting how she seemed to be studying her phone screen with increasing concern. She looked up, relief evident in her expression. "Yes, actually. The engine overheated, and now my phone is completely dead. I was supposed to be at a meeting an hour ago, and I have no way to contact anyone." Her voice carried a slight northeastern accent, definitely not local. "I don't suppose there's anywhere around here I could charge this?" Marcus studied her for a moment, taking in her obvious distress and the way she kept glancing between her disabled vehicle and the empty road stretching in both directions. Despite his own troubles, he couldn't leave someone stranded in this heat. "There's an outlet on my front porch," he said, gesturing toward the farmhouse. "You're welcome to use it. Might take a while for your car to cool down anyway." The gratitude in her eyes was immediate and genuine. "That would be incredible. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez, by the way." She extended her hand, and Marcus noticed the firm confidence of her grip despite the circumstances. "Marcus Hayes, come on up to the house. Get out of this sun." He led the way up the dirt driveway, past the faded red barn and the rusty farm equipment that hadn't run in years. The farmhouse itself was a testament to both pride and financial strain, its white paint peeling in places, but the yard kept neat and the porch swept clean. Elena followed, her heels clicking against the wooden steps as they climbed onto the covered porch. The shade provided immediate relief, and Marcus pointed to an electrical outlet near the door. "Should work fine there. Can I get you some water? Something cold to drink?" "Water would be amazing," she said, plugging in her phone with a cable she pulled from her purse. As the device powered up, she looked around the porch, taking in the view of the farmland stretching toward the horizon. "This is quite a spread. How long have you been farming here?" Marcus returned with a tall glass of ice water and settled into one of the wooden chairs that had been his grandfather's. "Family's been on this land since 1952. My grandfather bought it after he came back from Korea, passed it to my dad, and now it's mine." He gestured toward the struggling crops. "Though some years I wonder if I'm the one who'll end up losing it." Elena sipped the water gratefully, her eyes continuing to scan the landscape with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as more than casual interest. The drought's been hard on everyone around here, I imagine. 3 years running now. Corn's not what it used to be, and the irrigation system I've got is older than I am. Takes everything I make just to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid. Marcus found himself opening up to this stranger in a way he rarely did with people he'd known for years. Perhaps it was the isolation of farm life, or maybe something about her genuine interest in what he was saying. Her phone buzzed to life, immediately filling with notification sounds. Elena glanced at the screen but didn't immediately start making calls. Instead, she leaned back in the chair and continued the conversation. Have you ever considered alternative approaches to farming? Different crops maybe? Or supplemental income sources? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lady, I've considered everything. Solar panels, wind farming, even turning part of the land into a camping ground. Problem is, all of those things require money up front, and that's something I'm a bit short on these days. The mention of solar panels seemed to catch Elena's attention. She straightened slightly, her gaze sharpening, as she looked out over the expansive fields. Solar farming? That's interesting. What do you know about it? Not much beyond what I've read online. Companies lease your land, put up panels, pay you rent. Sounds too good to be true, which in my experience usually means it is. Marcus took a long drink from his own glass of water, ice cubes clinking against the sides. Besides, I have to give up farming, and that's all I know how to do. Elena was quiet for a moment, her eyes moving across the landscape with the focused attention of someone making mental calculations. The corn struggled in neat rows, but the land itself was flat and unobstructed, with excellent southern exposure. She could practically see the potential spread out before her like a blueprint. What if I told you there might be ways to do both? She said carefully. Farming and solar, I mean. There are new approaches being developed that allow agricultural use alongside renewable energy generation. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You seem to know a lot about this, for someone who just happened to break down on my road. Elena felt a flutter of nervousness. She'd been deliberately vague about her purpose in the area, partly out of professional habit, and partly because she'd learned that mentioning her company's mission too early often made landowners defensive. I work in renewable energy consulting. Part of my job is staying current on industry developments. The partial truth felt uncomfortable, but Elena had learned to be cautious in her initial conversations with potential partners. Too many deals had fallen through when farmers felt they were being approached by corporate interests rather than individuals who understood their struggles. Her phone continued to buzz with missed calls and messages, but she found herself more interested in this conversation than in the client meeting she was already going to miss. Marcus studied her face, noting the way she seemed to be holding something back. Consulting, huh? That what brings you to Iowa? Among other things. Elena checked her phone briefly, then set it aside again. I'm actually scouting locations for a pilot program my company is developing. We're looking for agricultural properties that might be suitable for innovative renewable energy projects. The admission hung in the air between them. Marcus felt a mix of suspicion and curiosity. And you just happened to break down in front of a farm that might fit what you're looking for? Elena laughed, and the sound was genuine. I know how that sounds, but I swear the car overheating was completely unplanned. Though I have to admit, your property is exactly the type of location we've been hoping to find. Marcus set down his glass and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What kind of pilot program? Elena chose her words carefully, aware that she was walking into territory that required delicate handling. It's called agrivoltaics, the practice of using land for both solar energy generation and agriculture. The panels are raised high enough to allow farming underneath, and in many cases, the partial shade actually helps certain crops handle extreme heat better. The farmer's expression was skeptical but interested. Sounds expensive. That's the beauty of this particular program. We're looking for partner farms where we can demonstrate the technology's effectiveness. The company would handle all installation costs and maintenance, and the landowner would receive lease payments, plus continue to farm the land. Elena could see Marcus processing this information, the wheels turning as he considered the implications. What's the catch? He asked bluntly. Elena appreciated his directness. The main requirement is that the landowner be willing to work with our agricultural consultants to optimize crop selection and farming practices for the dual-use environment. Some traditional farming methods have to be modified, and there's a learning curve involved. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, his gaze moving between Elena and the struggling corn visible through the porch railings. The afternoon heat was beginning to make the air shimmer over the fields, and the sound of cicadas created a constant background hum. His mind raced through the possibilities and the potential pitfalls, weighing the promise of financial relief against the risk of losing control over land that had been in his family for decades. "How many farms are you looking at for this pilot program?" he finally asked. "We're hoping to establish 3 demonstration sites across the Midwest: Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri. Each would showcase different aspects of the technology and different crop combinations." Elena felt the conversation shifting into more serious territory and tried to match Marcus's careful tone. "The Iowa site would be our flagship, the one we'd use to demonstrate the technology's effectiveness in corn country." Marcus stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out over his fields with new eyes. The idea of steady lease payments was incredibly appealing, especially with the mortgage pressure he was facing. But the thought of allowing corporate involvement in his family's land triggered deeply ingrained concerns about losing independence and control. "I'd have to know a lot more details before I could even consider something like this," he said without turning around. "Of course. That's exactly how it should be." Elena joined him at the porch railing, following his gaze across the farmland. "Nothing would happen without extensive consultation and planning. We'd need soil analysis, feasibility studies, environmental impact assessments. The whole process typically takes 6 to 8 months before any construction begins." The mention of environmental impact seemed to resonate with Marcus. He'd been watching the effects of climate change on his farming operation for years. From the increasingly unpredictable weather patterns to the longer droughts and more intense storms. The idea of being part of a solution rather than just a victim of the problem held strong appeal. "What kind of crops work best with this setup?" he asked. Elena felt a spark of excitement as she realized he was seriously considering the possibility. "That depends on several factors, but some of the most successful implementations have used soybeans, certain vegetables, and even specialty crops like herbs or berries. The partial shade can actually reduce water requirements and extend growing seasons for heat-sensitive plants." Marcus nodded slowly. The diversification aspect was attractive, given how vulnerable he'd become to corn price fluctuations and weather patterns. "And the lease payments? How do those work?" "Typically between $800 and $1,200 per acre annually, depending on the site's solar potential and local electricity rates. Payments are guaranteed for the duration of the contract, usually 20 to 25 years. Elena watched Marcus's expression carefully as she shared the financial details. Marcus did quick mental math. Even at the lower figure, the lease payments on his 160 acres would more than cover his mortgage and provide a stable income base that farming alone had been unable to deliver. The security of guaranteed payments, regardless of weather or market conditions, was almost too appealing to believe. $1,200 an acre, he repeated quietly. "That would be $192,000 annually if your entire property qualified." Elena could see the impact of the number on his expression, plus whatever agricultural income you could generate from the modified farming operations. The figure was transformative, representing more money than Marcus typically made in 2 or 3 good farming years combined. But he also knew that if something sounded too good to be true, it usually was. "What's your company's track record with this kind of project?" Elena hesitated briefly, aware that she was about to reveal more about herself than she'd initially planned. "Actually, I should probably be more direct about who I am and what I do. I'm not just a consultant. I'm the founder and CEO of Green Bridge Energy Solutions. We're a startup that specializes in innovative renewable energy applications for rural communities." Marcus turned to face her fully, reassessing everything about their conversation. "So this wasn't just a chance encounter for you. The car breakdown was genuine, I promise you that. But you're right that I was in this area specifically to evaluate potential sites for our pilot program. Your property had already been identified as a possibility based on satellite imagery and geographic data. Elena met his gaze directly. I should have been upfront about that from the beginning. Marcus felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of him was irritated by the partial deception, but another part was impressed by her honesty in revealing the full truth. The practical side of his mind was focused on the potential benefits, regardless of how the opportunity had presented itself. So what happens next? He asked. Well, first I need to get my car running and make it to the meeting I've already missed by 2 hours. Elena glanced at her phone, which showed numerous missed calls and messages. But if you're interested in learning more, I'd like to come back and do a proper presentation for you. Bring our technical team, show you detailed projections, maybe introduce you to other farmers who are already participating in agrivoltaic projects. Marcus considered this for a moment. When would you want to do that? How about next week? I could drive up from Des Moines, bring a full presentation, and we could spend a few hours going through everything in detail. No pressure to make any decisions, just information gathering. Elena could sense his continued interest despite his natural caution. That sounds reasonable, Marcus agreed. Though I should warn you, I'm going to have a lot of questions. Elena smiled. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. The farmers who ask the most questions usually end up being our best partners. They spent another hour talking while Elena's phone charged and her car cooled down. Marcus found himself sharing details about his financial struggles and farming challenges that he'd never discussed with anyone, while Elena explained more about her company's mission and the broader trends driving renewable energy adoption in rural areas. When Elena finally attempted to start her car, the engine turned over smoothly. The forced delay had actually resolved the overheating issue completely. I guess everything worked out for the best, she said as she prepared to leave. Maybe so, Marcus replied, watching as she gathered her belongings and prepared to return to her professional obligations. What time next? Week were you thinking? How about Tuesday afternoon? Say around 2 o'clock? That would give me time to drive up from the city and still have plenty of daylight to show you what we're envisioning. Elena handed him a business card with her contact information. Marcus studied the card, noting the company logo and her title, Dr. Eleanor Rodriguez, CEO and founder. He read aloud. PhD in what? Environmental engineering, with a specialization in renewable energy systems. I spent 8 years working for major solar development companies before starting Greenbridge. Elena felt it was important for him to understand her credentials and commitment to the field. Marcus nodded, impressed despite himself. Tuesday at 2 IT. As Elena drove away, Marcus remained on the porch for a long time, staring out at his struggling crops and trying to imagine solar panels rising above them. The conversation had introduced possibilities he'd never seriously considered, and the potential financial impact was difficult to ignore. But decades of farming had taught him to be skeptical of easy solutions and to carefully evaluate any proposition that seemed too good to be true. The rest of the week passed slowly for Marcus, filled with the usual routine of farm maintenance and his weekend shifts at the hardware store. But his mind kept returning to the conversation with Elena and the possibilities she'd outlined. He found himself researching agrivoltaics online, reading case studies, and looking at photographs of installations around the world. The technology was more established than he'd realized, with successful projects in Europe, Asia, and increasingly in the United States. The combination of renewable energy generation and continued agricultural use seemed to offer solutions to several of the challenges facing modern farming, from climate change adaptation to economic diversification. Elena, meanwhile, had rescheduled her missed meeting and spent the week preparing for her return visit to Marcus's farm. She assembled a comprehensive presentation that included financial projections, technical specifications, environmental impact data, and testimonials from other participating farmers. Her team at Greenbridge was excited about the potential partnership, as Marcus's property represented an ideal demonstration site for their technology. Tuesday afternoon arrived with slightly cooler temperatures, though the humidity remained oppressive. Marcus had spent the morning cleaning up around the farmhouse and thinking through the questions he wanted to ask. Promptly at 2 o'clock, Elena's silver sedan turned into his driveway. followed by a white pickup truck with Green Bridge Energy Solutions logos on the doors. Elena stepped out accompanied by two colleagues, James Wright, her chief technical officer, and Maria Santos, the company's agricultural specialist. Marcus greeted them on the porch, where he'd first met Elena, noting how professional and prepared they seemed, compared to the somewhat disheveled state Elena had been in during their first encounter. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet my team," Elena said, handling the introductions. "James handles all of our technical design and engineering, and Maria specializes in optimizing agricultural practices for agrivoltaic installations." James was a tall, thin man in his 50s, with graying hair, and the patient demeanor of someone accustomed to explaining complex technical concepts to non-engineers. Maria appeared to be in her early 40s, with calloused hands and dirt under her fingernails that suggested she spent more time in fields than in boardrooms. "Beautiful property," Maria said, immediately walking to the edge of the porch to survey the farmland. "The soil composition looks excellent for what we're proposing, and the topography is ideal for solar panel installation." Marcus found himself warming to her straightforward, practical approach. "What kind of farming background do you have?" "Grew up on a wheat farm in Kansas, agricultural engineering degree from K-State, and 15 years of experience in sustainable farming practices," Maria replied, without taking her eyes off the fields. "I understand what you're going through with these drought conditions. It's the same story across the Great Plains." James had begun unpacking equipment from the truck, including a laptop computer, a portable projector, and several large rolled-up documents that appeared to be technical drawings. "We've prepared a complete site analysis based on satellite data and geographic information, but we'd like to walk the property with you to verify our assumptions and get your input on the practical BESH considerations." Elena coordinated the afternoon's activities, starting with a walking tour of the farm. Marcus led them through the cornfields, pointing out the irrigation system, the condition of various sections of crops, and the challenges he'd been facing with soil moisture and heat stress. Maria took extensive notes and collected soil samples, while James used handheld instruments to measure solar exposure and wind patterns. "The southern exposure is exceptional," James observed as they stood near the center of the property. "We're looking at some of the best solar potential I've seen in the Midwest. The lack of trees or significant elevation changes means minimal shading issues throughout the day." Maria knelt down to examine the soil more closely. "pH levels look good for soybeans or vegetables, and the organic matter content is better than I expected given the drought conditions. You've been doing good work maintaining soil health despite the challenging conditions." Marcus felt a surge of pride at the professional recognition of his farming efforts. "My grandfather always said the soil was the foundation of everything. Even in bad years, you keep building it up for the good years to come." "That philosophy aligns perfectly with what we're trying to achieve," Elena said. "Long-term sustainability rather than short-term extraction." They spent the rest of the afternoon on the porch, with James and Elena walking through detailed technical presentations, while Maria discussed agricultural adaptations and crop selection strategies. The financial projections were even more favorable than Elena had initially indicated, thanks to state and federal incentives that would apply to the project. "Based on our analysis, we're looking at lease payments of approximately $1,100 per acre annually," Elena explained, pointing to a detailed spreadsheet on the laptop screen. "The contract would be for 25 years, with automatic renewal options and built-in escalation clauses tied to inflation and energy price increases." Marcus did the math again, still finding the numbers difficult to believe. "That's $176,000 a year, guaranteed, regardless of weather or crop prices." "Exactly. And that's just the lease payment for the solar installation. You'd still be farming the land and keeping whatever agricultural income you generate." Maria showed him photographs of successful agrivoltaic installations, including close-up shots of crops growing in the partial shade beneath solar panels. James pulled out architectural drawings showing how the installation would look on Marcus's property. The panels would be mounted on tracking systems that follow the sun throughout the day, maximizing energy generation while providing optimal shading patterns for the crops below. The support structure would be high enough to accommodate standard farming equipment. End quote. Marcus studied the drawings carefully, trying to visualize the transformation of his familiar landscape. What about maintenance access? How do you service all this equipment without disrupting farming operations? The service roads would be integrated into the design, and all maintenance activities would be scheduled around your farming calendar, James explained. We've learned a lot from our early installations about how to minimize conflicts between energy operations and agricultural activities. Elena could see that Marcus was seriously engaged with the technical details, asking informed questions and thinking through practical implications. His farming experience was actually helping him identify potential issues that some of their other partners had missed initially. The installation timeline would be approximately 4 months, with most of the heavy construction happening outside of growing season, Elena continued. We'd want to break ground in late fall, complete the infrastructure over the winter, and have everything operational by early spring. Marcus considered the timing. That would mean making a decision fairly soon. We'd need a signed letter of intent by the end of August to meet our construction schedule, Elena confirmed. But that would just be an agreement to move forward with detailed planning and permitting. The full contract wouldn't be finalized until all the engineering studies and environmental assessments are complete. The afternoon was growing late, and Marcus could see that his visitors were beginning to pack up their materials. The amount of information they'd shared was overwhelming, and he knew he'd need time to process everything and consider the implications carefully. This is a lot to think about, he said honestly. What kind of timeline are you looking at for a decision? We understand this is a major commitment, Eleanor replied. Why don't you take a couple of weeks to review everything we've discussed? I'll leave you with all the technical documents and financial projections, plus contact information for other farmers who are already participating in our programs. Maria handed him a folder thick with information. I've included soil analysis results, crop selection recommendations, and detailed information about agricultural practices that work best in Sevilla, agrivoltaic systems. Feel free to call me with any questions about the farming aspects. James provided his own folder containing technical specifications, engineering drawings, and maintenance protocols. The technology is more mature than most people realize. We're not asking you to be a guinea pig for unproven systems. As the Greenbridge team loaded their equipment back into the truck, Elena lingered on the porch with Marcus. I know this seems like a big leap, but I want you to know that we're committed to making this work for you, not just for us. Our success depends on our partners being successful. Marcus appreciated her direct approach. I can see that you've put a lot of thought into this. It's just hard to imagine changing something that's been in my family for so long. I understand that completely. But sometimes the best way to preserve a family legacy is to adapt it to changing circumstances. Elena looked out over the struggling cornfield. Your grandfather had to adapt when he bought this land in the 1950s. Your father had to adapt when farming practices changed in the 70s and 80s. This might be your generation's adaptation. The observation resonated with Marcus more than he'd expected. His family had indeed faced numerous changes over the decades. From mechanization to chemical fertilizers to genetically modified crops, the idea of renewable energy as the next evolution rather than a complete departure made the proposition feel less radical. I'll give this serious consideration, Marcus promised as Elena prepared to leave. That's all we can ask. Call me with any questions, and don't hesitate to reach out to the other farmers on that reference list. They were skeptical initially too, but I think you'll find their experiences reassuring. The next 2 weeks were filled with research and soul-searching for Marcus. He spent hours reading through the technical documents, called 3 of the reference farmers for lengthy conversations about their experiences, and even drove to Illinois to visit an existing agrivoltaic installation to see the technology in operation. What he saw was impressive and reassuring. The installation he visited was on a farm similar to his graph. Own and the farmer, a man named David Chen, had been operating under an agrivoltaic system for 3 years. The crops were thriving in the partial shade. The lease payments had allowed Chen to pay off his mortgage and make significant crop improvements to his operation. And the technology was functioning exactly as promised. Best decision I ever made, Chen told Marcus as they walked between the rows of solar panels and soybean plants. I should have done this years earlier. The guaranteed income took all the stress out of farming, and I'm actually growing better crops now than I was before. The positive testimonial from someone in a similar situation carried significant weight with Marcus. Shen's operation looked professional and well-maintained, with no signs of the corporate exploitation or loss of farming identity that Marcus had feared. Marcus also consulted with his banker, who was enthusiastic about the financial stability that the solar lease payments would provide. The guaranteed income stream would not only resolve his current mortgage concerns, but would qualify him for additional credit to make improvements to his farming operation. By the end of the second week, Marcus had made his decision. He called Elena on a Thursday evening, catching her at her office in Des Moines as she was preparing to leave for the day. "I've thought about your proposal carefully, and I'd like to move forward with the letter of intent," he said without preamble. Elena felt a surge of excitement and relief. Marcus's farm had become her top choice for the Iowa demonstration site, and his practical farming experience and thoughtful approach to decision-making made him an ideal partner for the pilot program. "That's wonderful news, Marcus. I'll have our legal team prepare the letter of intent and send it to you for review tomorrow. Are there any specific concerns or modifications you'd like to address?" Marcus had indeed identified several points he wanted to clarify. "I want assurance that I'll have input on crop selection and farming practices. I don't want to be told how to farm my own land." "Absolutely. Maria would be working with you as a consultant, not a supervisor. All agricultural decisions would be yours to make, with her providing advice and recommendations based on what's worked well at other sites. And I want to make sure the contract includes adequate protection if the technology doesn't perform as promised, or if there are unforeseen problems with the dual-use approach." Elena appreciated his thorough consideration of potential issues. The contract includes performance guarantees for both energy generation and agricultural compatibility. If the system doesn't meet specified targets, we're responsible for modifications or, in extreme cases, removal and site restoration. They spent another hour discussing contract details and addressing Marcus's remaining concerns. Elena was impressed by the depth of his research and the thoughtfulness of his questions. Many farmers approach these decisions emotionally, either embracing the opportunity too quickly or rejecting it out of hand. Marcus had clearly done his homework and was making an informed decision based on careful analysis. The letter of intent was signed within a week, and the detailed planning process began immediately. The next several months were filled with soil studies, environmental assessments, engineering surveys, and regulatory approvals. Marcus remained involved in every step of the process, learning about solar technology and grid interconnection, while continuing to farm his land and work his weekend shifts at the hardware store. Elena made frequent trips to the farm, sometimes alone and sometimes with various specialists and contractors. Marcus found himself looking forward to these visits, enjoying the collaboration and the glimpse into a world of innovation and possibility that he'd never been exposed to before. The relationship between Marcus and Elena evolved from professional courtesy to genuine friendship as they worked together on the project. Elena appreciated Marcus's practical wisdom and his deep understanding of the land, while Marcus was impressed by Elena's commitment to sustainable development and her genuine respect for farming communities. "You know, when you first broke down in front of my place, I thought you were just another city person who didn't understand rural life," Marcus admitted during one of their planning sessions. Elena laughed. "I probably looked the part that day, overheated and overdressed for Iowa in July. But I grew up in rural New Mexico, actually. My family were small-scale farmers before drought forced them to sell the land. That's part of what drives my commitment to helping farmers adapt to climate change, rather than becoming victims of it." The personal revelation added depth to their working relationship and helped Marcus understand Elena's genuine passion for the work they were doing together. She wasn't just another entrepreneur looking to profit from biogas, rural resources, but someone who understood the challenges facing farming communities and was committed to developing solutions that benefited everyone involved. Construction began in November, as planned, with Marcus watching in fascination as his familiar landscape was transformed. The installation process was more complex than he'd anticipated, involving extensive ground preparation, electrical buff, infrastructure, and the precision mounting of thousands of solar panels on tracking systems that would follow the sun throughout each day. Elena visited the site regularly during construction, often bringing potential investors or other farmers who were considering similar projects. Marcus found himself serving as an informal spokesman for agrivoltaic technology, sharing his experience and observations with visitors who were curious about the practical realities of dual-use farming. The thing that surprised me most is how little disruption there's been to the farming operation, he told a group of farmers from Nebraska who visited in February. I was worried about compaction and damage to the soil, but their construction practices have been excellent. If anything, the improved access roads have made farming easier. The installation was completed in March, just as Marcus was preparing for spring planting. The transformation was dramatic, with neat rows of solar panels stretching across his fields, supported by slender metal posts that allowed plenty of clearance for farming equipment. The panels were angled to optimize both solar exposure and a distribution of shade and sunlight to the crops below. Elena was present for the system's activation ceremony, a small gathering that included Marcus, the construction crew, local government officials, and representatives from the utility company that would purchase the electricity generated by the installation. As the system came online and began feeding power into the electrical grid, Marcus felt a profound sense of accomplishment and optimism about the future. First month's lease payment should hit your account next week, Elena told him as they watched the digital displays showing real-time energy production. And you'll get monthly reports on system performance and your share of the environmental benefits. Marcus nodded, still somewhat amazed by the transformation of his property and his financial situation. The guaranteed lease payments had indeed resolved his mortgage concerns and provided a stable income base that allowed him to focus on optimizing his farming practices rather than simply surviving from season to balané. Season. The agricultural aspects of the project proved to be as successful as the energy generation. Working with Maria Santos, Marcus experimented with soybeans, specialty vegetables, and even a small herb garden that thrived in the partial shade provided by the solar panels. The reduced direct sunlight actually improved growing conditions during the increasingly hot summers, and the improved soil moisture retention reduced his irrigation requirements. By the end of the first growing season, Marcus was producing both more electricity and better crops than anyone had projected. The success of the installation attracted attention from agricultural publications, renewable energy industry journals, and government agencies interested in promoting similar projects. Elena's company used Marcus's farm as a showcase for the technology, bringing hundreds of visitors to see agrivoltaics in action. Marcus became comfortable giving tours and presentations, sharing his experience with farmers, investors, policymakers, and academic researchers who were studying the potential for dual-use farming systems. The financial stability has been transformative, Marcus explained to a group of state legislators who visited in September. But the agricultural benefits have been just as important. I'm growing better crops with less water, and I have the security of knowing that my income isn't entirely dependent on weather and market conditions. Elena watched from the back of the group, pleased to see how Marcus had embraced his role as an advocate for agrivoltaic technology. His authentic enthusiasm and practical experience carried more credibility than any corporate presentation could provide. The success of Marcus's installation led to contracts for the Illinois and Missouri demonstration sites, as Elena had hoped. Greenbridge Energy Solutions grew rapidly, establishing partnerships with farmers across the Midwest and attracting significant investment from venture capital firms interested in sustainable agriculture and renewable energy. Marcus remained Elena's closest partner and advisor as the company expanded. His practical insights and farmers' perspective helped shape Greenbridge's approach to new installations, ensuring that the needs and concerns of farming communities remained central to the company's mission. 2 years after their first meeting, Marcus and Elena were featured together on the cover of Agricultural Innovation magazine, standing in front of the solar panels that had transformed both of their lives. The article described their partnership as a model for how technological innovation and traditional farming could work together to address the challenges of climate change and rural economic development. I never imagined when I offered to let a stranger charge her phone that it would lead to all this, Marcus said during the interview for the magazine article. Elena smiled, remembering that sweltering afternoon when her car had broken down at just the right place, at just the right time. Sometimes the most important opportunities come disguised as simple acts of kindness. The success of their collaboration had indeed exceeded both of their expectations. Marcus's farm had become not just a demonstration site for agrivoltaic technology, but a symbol of how innovation and tradition could work together to create sustainable solutions for the challenges facing rural America. Marcus's financial situation had been completely transformed. The lease payments had allowed him to pay off his mortgage years ahead of schedule, invest in new farming equipment, and even establish a college fund for his nephew, who was showing interest in both farming and renewable energy technology. The guaranteed income stream had eliminated the financial stress that had dominated his life for years, allowing him to focus on farming practices that prioritized sustainability and soil health rather than short-term survival. The Lanus company had grown from a startup with ambitious dreams to a recognized leader in agrivoltaic technology, with installations across 12 states and international interest from countries facing similar agricultural challenges. She had been invited to speak at conferences around the world, sharing the lessons learned from projects like Marcus's farm and advocating for policies that supported renewable energy development in rural communities. The third anniversary of their partnership was marked by a celebration at Marcus's farm, attended by dozens of farmers who had followed his example and partnered with Green Bridge or similar companies. The event showcased not just the technological success of the installation, but the community of innovators that had grown around the agrivoltaic movement. During the celebration, Marcus took Elena aside for a private conversation as the sun set behind the solar panels that had transformed his landscape and his life. "I've been thinking about that day when you broke down here," he said, gesturing toward the spot where her car had overheated 3 years earlier. "It seems like a lifetime ago," Eleanor replied, looking across the fields where crops grew in neat rows between the solar installations, their leaves catching the last rays of sunlight filtered through the panel arrays. "I keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't been home that day, or if I'd been too suspicious to help a stranger." Marcus continued, "How many opportunities do we miss because we're too focused on our own problems to notice when something important is right in front of us?" Elena nodded thoughtfully. "I think about that too. If my car hadn't broken down, I would have driven past your farm like all the others I'd identified as possibilities. I would have made my scheduled meeting, given a standard presentation, and probably never taken the time for the kind of conversation we had that day." The partnership had indeed been built on more than just business considerations. The trust and mutual respect that had developed during that first afternoon had become the foundation for a collaboration that neither of them could have imagined at the time. Marcus's willingness to take a chance on new technology had been matched by Elena's commitment to ensuring that the benefits of that technology were shared fairly with the farming communities that hosted it. The other farmers in the program, did they feel the same way about their experiences? Marcus asked, genuinely curious about how the model was working across different locations and farming operations. Elena's expression became thoughtful as she considered the question. "Most of them do, though it's taken longer for some to fully embrace the changes. You were unique in how quickly you grasped both the technical and agricultural aspects of what we were proposing. Some of our other partners needed more time to feel comfortable with the technology and the new farming practices." End quote. Marcus appreciated her honesty about the challenges they'd faced. "What about the ones who haven't worked out as well?" "We've had a few installations where the cultural fit wasn't as good as we'd hoped," Elena admitted. "Farmers who expected to be completely hands-off or who weren't willing to adapt their practices for optimal dual-use performance. Those situations taught us the importance of partner selection and the need for ongoing support and consultation." The conversation was interrupted by Maria Santos, who approached them with a tablet displaying real-time data from the farm's monitoring systems. "Marcus, you might want to see this," she said, clearly excited about something she'd discovered in the numbers. Marcus and Elena gathered around the tablet as Maria pulled up graphs showing energy production, crop yields, soil moisture levels, and other key metrics from the past growing season. "Look at this comparison," Maria said, pointing to side-by-side charts. "Your soybean yields this year were 18% higher than the regional average, and your energy production exceeded projections by 12%. The data confirmed what Marcus had been observing throughout the growing season. The crops were indeed thriving under the agrivoltaic system, benefiting from the partial shade during the hottest parts of the day, while still receiving adequate sunlight for photosynthesis. The solar panels were performing better than expected, thanks to the cooling effect of the vegetation below and the optimal positioning of the tracking systems. The most interesting finding is the soil health improvement, Maria continued, swiping to another screen full of data. Organic matter content is up, water retention has improved significantly, and we're seeing increased microbial activity throughout the root zone. Elena studied the numbers with the trained eye of someone who had spent years analyzing similar data from installations around the world. These results are among the best we've seen anywhere. Marcus, your farming practices combined with the agrivoltaic system are creating something really special here. Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction looking at the data that confirmed his observations and instincts. The land that had struggled to produce adequate crops just a few years earlier was now thriving in ways he'd never imagined possible. The combination of guaranteed income, improved growing conditions, and sustainable farming practices had created a virtuous cycle that benefited both the environment and his bottom line. As the celebration continued around them, with farmers sharing stories and experiences from their own installations, Marcus reflected on how profoundly his life had changed since that sweltering afternoon when he offered to help a stranded motorist. The simple act of neighborly kindness had opened doors to opportunities and relationships that had transformed not just his own situation, but had contributed to a broader movement towards sustainable agriculture and renewable energy. Elena excused herself to rejoin the other guests, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts as darkness settled over the farm. The solar panels had stopped generating electricity for the day, but LED lights powered by the stored energy illuminated the pathways between the installations, creating a gentle glow across the landscape. He walked slowly through the rows, remembering how different this place had looked and felt just a few years earlier. The struggling corn, the financial pressure, the uncertainty about the future had all been replaced by abundance, stability, and optimism. But more than the material changes, he was struck by how the experience had connected him to a larger community of innovators and problem solvers who were working to address some of the world's most pressing challenges. The sound of footsteps on the gravel path interrupted his contemplation. Elena had returned, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the refreshment table that had been set up near the farmhouse. "Thought you might like something warm," she said, handing him one of the cups. They stood together in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the last of the celebration guests beginning to gather their things and prepare for the drive home. The success of the evening was evident in the animated conversations and exchange of contact information that was happening throughout the gathering. "What's next for Green Bridge?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about Elena's plans for expanding the company and the technology. Elena's eyes lit up with the same enthusiasm he'd seen that first day when she described the potential of agrivoltaic systems. "We're working on several exciting developments. Advanced panel designs that will be even more compatible with farming operations, energy storage systems that will provide power during outages, and partnerships with food processing companies that want to source ingredients from sustainable farming operations." Unquote. The mention of food processing partnerships intrigued Marcus. What kind of partnerships? Companies that are committed to sustainable sourcing and want to be able to tell their customers that their ingredients come from farms that generate renewable energy and use environmentally responsible farming practices, Elena explained. It's another potential income stream for farmers, and it helps create market incentives for sustainable agriculture. Marcus could see the appeal of such arrangements, both for farmers and for companies looking to improve their environmental credentials. The idea of premium pricing for products grown under agrivoltaic systems could provide additional financial benefits beyond the lease payments and traditional crop sales. "Have you approached any companies about sourcing from our farm specifically?" he asked. Elena nodded. "Actually, yes. There's a major organic food company that's very interested in sourcing soybeans from agrivoltaic installations. They're willing to pay a premium above market prices for products that meet their sustainability criteria." The news represented yet another layer of financial opportunity that Marcus hadn't anticipated when he'd first agreed to partner with Green Bridge. The project that had begun as a solution to his mortgage problems had evolved into a comprehensive transformation of his farming operation and his role in the broader agricultural economy. As the evening wound down and the last of the guests departed, Marcus and Elena found themselves back on the porch where they'd first met. The setting was familiar, but everything else had changed dramatically. The struggling farmer and the stranded motorist had become partners in an enterprise that was reshaping how people thought about the relationship between energy production and agriculture. "I have a confession to make," Elena said as they settled into the same chairs they'd occupied 3 years earlier. "That day when my car broke down, I was actually having second thoughts about the whole agrivoltaic concept. I'd been getting pushback from investors who thought the technology was too complex and the market too small." Marcus was surprised by this revelation. Elena had always seemed supremely confident about the potential of her technology and business model. "What changed your mind?" "Talking to you that afternoon reminded me why I'd gotten into this work in the first place," Elena said. "You understood immediately what we were trying to achieve, and you asked exactly the right questions about implementation and sustainability. It convinced me that there really was a market for what we were developing." Marcus reflected on this information, realizing that their partnership had been mutually beneficial in ways that went beyond the obvious financial and technological aspects. "So, in a way, helping you that day helped save your company?" "I think it's fair to say that our conversation that day was a turning point for both of us," Elena agreed. "You were facing financial challenges that threatened your family's farming legacy, and I was struggling to convince people that agrivoltaic technology could be commercially viable. We solved each other's problems." The observation highlighted the interconnected nature of their success. Marcus's willingness to embrace new technology had provided Elena with the demonstration site and success story she needed to attract investors and expand her business. Elena's innovative approach had provided Marcus with the financial stability and sustainable farming practices he needed to preserve and improve his family's land. As they talked late into the evening, both Marcus and Elena found themselves thinking about the broader implications of their partnership and its success. The model they had developed together was being replicated across the country, helping other farmers achieve financial stability while contributing to renewable energy production and climate change mitigation. The transformation of Marcus's farm had become more than just a business success. It had become a symbol of how innovation and tradition could work together to address complex challenges. The story of their partnership was being told in academic conferences, policy debates, and corporate boardrooms as an example of how sustainable development could benefit both rural communities and urban class populations. "Sometimes I wonder what my grandfather would think of all this," Marcus said, gesturing toward the solar installations that now dominated his landscape. "I think he'd be amazed by the technology, but I believe he'd approve of the results." Elena smiled, understanding the importance of family legacy and continuity in farming communities. "From what you've told me about him, I think he'd be proud that you found a way to keep the land in the family and make it more productive than ever." The comment touched on something that had been important to Marcus throughout the entire process. Despite the dramatic changes to his farming operation, he still felt connected to the land and the farming traditions that had shaped his family for generations. The agrivoltaic system had enhanced rather than replaced his agricultural activities, allowing him to honor the past while embracing the future. As the night grew late, Elena prepared to drive back to Des Moines, but she paused at her car to look back at the farm one more time. The sight of the solar panels silhouetted against the star-filled sky, with the farmhouse lights glowing warmly in the distance, captured the essence of what they had accomplished together. "You know, I still think about what might have happened if you hadn't been willing to help a stranger that day," she said. Marcus joined her beside the car, following her gaze across the transformed landscape. "I think about that too. But I also think that things have a way of working out the way they're supposed to. Maybe your car breaking down here wasn't such a coincidence after all." Elena laughed softly. "Maybe not. Either way, I'm grateful for your kindness that day, and for everything that's happened since." As Elena drove away, Marcus remained outside for a while longer, reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. The struggling farmer who had been worried about losing his family's land had become a successful pioneer in sustainable agriculture and renewable energy. The financial pressures that had once dominated his thoughts had been replaced by opportunities and possibilities he could never have imagined. The transformation hadn't been without challenges and adjustments. Learning to farm under solar panels had required modifications to his equipment and techniques. Dealing with visitors and media attention had pushed him out of his comfort zone. Managing the relationship with Greenbridge and other partners had required business skills he'd had to develop on the job. But each challenge had also brought rewards. The modified farming techniques had actually improved his crop yields and soil health. The media attention had connected him to a network of innovative farmers and researchers working on similar projects. The business relationships had provided opportunities for continued learning and growth that went far beyond his original farming operation. 3 years later, Marcus's farm had become a destination for agricultural tours, research studies, and policy discussions. Students from agricultural colleges visited to study agrivoltaic systems in action. Government officials came to understand how policy changes could support similar projects. International delegations arrived to learn how the technology might be adapted to their own country's agricultural systems. Despite all the attention and recognition, Marcus remained grounded in the practical realities of farming and land stewardship. He continued to work closely with Maria Santos on optimizing crop selection and farming practices for the dual-use system. He maintained his weekend job at the hardware store, partly out of habit and partly because he enjoyed the connection to his local community. The financial success of the agrivoltaic installation had indeed solved Marcus's immediate problems, but it had also created new opportunities and responsibilities. He had become an investor in other Greenbridge projects, using his lease payments to support the expansion of agrivoltaic technology to other farms. He had established a scholarship fund for students studying sustainable agriculture and renewable energy. Perhaps most importantly, Marcus had found purpose and meaning in his role as an advocate for innovative farming practices. The knowledge that his success was helping other farmers facing similar challenges gave him a sense of contribution that went beyond his own economic well-being. Elena's company continued to grow and evolve, with installations now spanning multiple countries and various agricultural applications. She had been recognized with numerous awards for her contributions to sustainable energy and rural development. Her TED talk about the potential of agrivoltaic technology had been viewed millions of times, inspiring entrepreneurs and farmers around the world to explore similar partnerships. But through all of her success and recognition, Elena maintained her connection to the farm in Iowa where it had all begun. She continued to visit regularly, not just for business purposes, but to maintain the friendship and partnership that had been so crucial to both of their journeys. The relationship between Marcus and Elena had evolved into something deeper than a business partnership. They had become collaborators in a mission that extended far beyond their individual interests, working together to demonstrate that sustainable development could benefit everyone involved rather than requiring trade-offs between economic and environmental goals. 5 years after their first meeting, Marcus and Elena were invited to speak at the World Food Summit in Rome about their experiences with agrivoltaic technology. Standing before an audience of agricultural ministers, corporate executives, and development organizations, they shared the story of how a chance encounter on a hot Iowa afternoon had led to innovations that were now being implemented on 6 continents. The most important lesson we've learned, Marcus told the international audience, is that the best solutions often come from bringing together different perspectives and areas of expertise. I knew farming, Elena knew renewable energy, and together we discovered possibilities that neither of us could have imagined alone. Elena nodded in agreement. But the technical aspects of what we accomplished were actually less important than the trust and mutual respect that made our partnership possible. Innovation requires taking risks, and people are only willing to take risks with partners they trust." End quote. Their presentation was followed by a panel discussion with other farmers and entrepreneurs who were implementing similar projects around the world. The conversation covered technical challenges, policy barriers, financing mechanisms, and cultural considerations that affected the adoption of agrivoltaic technology in different regions and agricultural systems. During the panel, Marcus was struck by how similar the challenges and opportunities were across different countries and farming systems. The financial pressures facing small farmers, the need for climate change adaptation, and the potential for renewable energy to provide economic diversification were consistent themes regardless of geography or crop types. After the summit, Marcus and Elena spent several days touring agrivoltaic installations in Italy and Spain, meeting with farmers who were implementing similar systems in Mediterranean agricultural settings. The visits provided new ideas for optimizing their own operations and confirmed that the principles they had developed together were applicable across a wide range of farming contexts. The international experience reinforced Marcus's understanding of his role in a global movement towards sustainable agriculture and renewable energy. What had begun as a solution to his personal financial challenges had become part of a worldwide effort to address climate change, food security, and rural economic development. Returning to Iowa, Marcus found himself seeing his farm with new eyes once again. The installation that had once seemed revolutionary now felt like a natural part of the landscape, integrated seamlessly with the agricultural activities that remained at the heart of his identity and purpose. The crops were thriving in their sixth growing season under the agrivoltaic system, with yields that consistently exceeded regional averages and soil health that continued to improve year after year. The financial returns had allowed Marcus to expand his operation, leasing additional land from neighbors and implementing sustainable farming practices that complemented the renewable energy generation. Elena's visits to the farm had become less frequent as her company's operations expanded globally, but their friendship and professional collaboration remained strong. They spoke regularly by phone and video conference, sharing ideas and discussing new developments in agrivoltaic technology and sustainable agriculture. The success of their partnership had attracted attention from investors and policymakers interested in scaling up similar projects. Marcus found himself serving on advisory boards and consulting with government agencies about policies that could support the expansion of agrivoltaic technology. One particularly meaningful development was the establishment of an agrivoltaic research center at the state university, partly funded by donations from Marcus and Elena. The center was conducting studies on crop selection, panel design, and farming techniques that would benefit future installations around the world. As Marcus approached his 50th birthday, he reflected on how completely his life had been transformed by that chance encounter 7 years earlier. The struggling farmer, who had been worried about losing his family's land, had become a recognized leader in sustainable agriculture, a successful entrepreneur, and an advocate for innovative solutions to climate change. The transformation hadn't been limited to his professional life. The financial security provided by the agrivoltaic installation had allowed Marcus to pursue interests and relationships that had been impossible when he was focused solely on economic survival. He had traveled to conferences and installations around the world, developed friendships with farmers and researchers from dozens of countries, and gained a perspective on global agricultural challenges that informed his local farming decisions. Most importantly, Marcus had discovered a sense of purpose and meaning that went beyond his own economic well-being. The knowledge that his farm was contributing to renewable energy production, climate change mitigation, and the development of sustainable farming practices gave him a sense of legacy that complemented, rather than replaced, his connection to family farming traditions. Elena's journey had been equally transformative. The struggling startup that had been uncertain about its market potential had become a major player in the renewable energy industry, with billions of dollars in installations and thousands of farmers participating in agrivoltaic projects. But Eleanor remained committed to the principles and relationships that had shaped her company's early development. Greenbridge continued to prioritize partnerships with family farmers over large-scale corporate installations, focusing on projects that provided genuine benefits to rural communities rather than simply maximizing energy production. The company's success had provided Elena with opportunities to influence policy and investment decisions at the highest levels of government and industry. She had testified before Congress about the potential of agrivoltaic technology, advised the Department of Agriculture on sustainable farming initiatives, and worked with international development organizations on projects in developing countries. Through all of her professional achievements, Elena maintained her connection to the farm in Iowa, where her vision had first become reality. Marcus's farm remained her favorite example of agrivoltaic technology's potential, and she continued to bring visitors there to see the technology in action and hear Marcus's perspective on its benefits and challenges. The friendship between Marcus and Elena had become one of the most rewarding aspects of their professional collaboration. Despite their different backgrounds and the demands of their respective careers, they had maintained a relationship based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. Their story had been featured in documentaries, case studies, and popular media accounts of the renewable energy transition. But for both Marcus and Elena, the most meaningful aspect of their partnership remained the personal transformation they had experienced and the contribution they had made to addressing some of the world's most pressing challenges. As they looked toward the future, both Marcus and Elena saw continued opportunities for innovation and growth. New technologies were being developed that would make agrivoltaic systems even more efficient and compatible with farming operations. Policy changes were creating additional incentives for renewable energy adoption in rural areas. Growing consumer demand for sustainably produced food was creating premium markets for products from agrivoltaic farms. Marcus was planning to expand his agrivoltaic installation to additional property he was considering purchasing from a retiring neighbor. The expansion would allow him to experiment with different crops and panel configurations while providing additional renewable energy capacity for the regional grid. Elena was working on developing agrivoltaic systems specifically designed for different agricultural applications, from fruit orchards to vegetable farms to pastureland for livestock. Each application presented unique technical challenges and opportunities that required careful research and development. But both Marcus and Elena understood that their greatest contribution might be the example they had set for others facing similar challenges and opportunities. The story of their partnership demonstrated that innovative solutions were possible when people were willing to take risks, work together, and maintain focus on shared values and mutual benefit. The farm in Iowa, where their collaboration had begun, continued to serve as a demonstration site and inspiration for farmers, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and researchers from around the world. The transformation of that struggling corn farm into a model of sustainable agriculture and renewable energy had become a symbol of hope and possibility for rural communities everywhere. Standing on the porch where they had first met, now 8 years after that sweltering afternoon when Elena's car had broken down, Marcus and Elena could see the impact of their partnership extending far beyond the stallous boundaries of the farm itself. The solar panels stretching across the landscape were generating clean electricity that powered homes and businesses throughout the region. The crops growing beneath those panels were feeding families while demonstrating that sustainable farming practices could be both environmentally responsible and economically viable. More importantly, the success of their collaboration had inspired countless others to pursue similar partnerships and innovations. The model they had developed together was being replicated and adapted around the world, contributing to a global transition toward more sustainable and equitable approaches to energy production and food systems. As the sun set behind the solar panels that had transformed both of their lives, Marcus and Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point and the possibilities that lay ahead. The simple act of kindness that had begun their partnership had grown into something neither of them could have imagined, demonstrating the power of human connection and collaboration to address even the most complex challenges facing our world. The story of Marcus Hayes and Elena Rodriguez serves as a reminder that the most important opportunities often come disguised as ordinary moments, requiring simple acts of compassion and openness to possibility. Their partnership proved that when people are willing to trust each other and work together toward shared goals, the results can be transformative not just for themselves, but for their communities and the world beyond.